Joe! Joe on Joe is the only podcast where Joe talks about Joe. And now, your host, Joe Slepsky.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Joe on Joe Illustrated. That's right, it's issue 30 of Joe on Joe Illustrated, and that means we are sharing this with the rest of the world. You see, normally Joe on Joe Illustrated is our patron exclusive podcast. And if you don't know what being a patron is, that means you've never checked out patreon.com. What is patreon.com? Patreon.com is a platform to let you, the listener, support the shows and creators that you like directly. In my case, I do the Joe on Joe podcast every week on the feed that you're listening to right now. But for the last few months, I've also been doing the Joe on Joe Illustrated episodes. And those are exclusive to people who went to patreon.com and they signed up to help support the show. For just $1 a month, you can show some love to the Joe on Joe show and let me know you support the whole enterprise. For $3 a month, you get exclusive access to every episode of this podcast, which is Joe on Joe Illustrated. And Joe on Joe Illustrated is where I go over every single issue of G.I. Joe, Real American Hero in sequential order, panel by panel, page by page, and we break it down with an eye towards the history of comic books and art styles and coloring things and dialogue. I mean, we break down everything on this show with a fine-tooth comb. It's the kind of breakdown I think G.I. Joe deserves, and I really, really love doing it. And every 5 episodes, I like to share with the world to see what you're missing. So if you're listening to this for the first time and you're like, Joe and Joe Illustrated, it's pretty good. Why does he only put every 5 episodes up? That's totally why. So if you want to go to patreon.com/JoeOnJoePod, you can see how you too can be a supporter and sponsor and producer of Joe on Joe. In fact, this week, we've got our first sponsor. I want to welcome on board our good friend of the show, Mr. Omar Spahi. Omar has been a guest on Joe and Joe before. And who is Omar? Omar is a comic book publisher. He loves comic books. And so he also created a show. He's got a podcast out there. It's called the Dreamer Comics Podcast. And he talks about how comic books are made, guys. So I'm breaking down every issue by issue. Omar is still getting at the big picture, and he's talking to current creators, guys like Jim Valentino, Joe Kelly, Ryan Parrott's been on the show, Kyle Higgins. These are just off the top of my head. They dig into what makes a comic book creator today tick. Omar himself has published with Image Comics, so he's got a lot of connections, and he knows a ton of people in the industry. Brian Bucceletto's been on the show. He did a great episode. And it's really cool. You learn the behind-the-scenes story of some of Omar's favorite comics. You can find it on iTunes, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Dreamer Comics Podcast. Go to dreamercomicspodcast.com and learn how to turn your comic book dream into reality. It's what Omar did. Omar, a long time, we talked about this when he was a guest on my show. He was like, I want to do a comic book, so now I need to learn how to make that happen. And I know there's a lot of you listeners out there that want to do comic books, that you want to get into comic books, or maybe it's animation, or maybe it's writing, or whatever the creative thing is that you want to do. Dreamer Comics Podcast is like that rocket fuel for your imagination, because you're hearing all these guys who are currently working in the industry tell their story from the start. They too were in your position. They wanted to do comics. They wanted to write. They wanted to draw. They wanted to fill in the blank. And Omar covers the steps on how they got there. It is a really great podcast, guys. And Omar is a proud sponsor. I threw the word proud in there, Omar. I hope you are. Proud sponsor of the Joe on Joe podcast. And he's a really great guy, a hell of a guy. And so I want everyone listening to look for Dreamer Comics Podcast on iTunes, anywhere you get your podcast, anywhere you're listening to this right now. Go check out the Dreamer Comics Podcast. And then later on, go to patreon.com/JoeOnJoePod and see how you can also help produce the Joe on Joe show. It's just that simple, guys. So today we are covering issue 30 of G.I. Joe, Real American Hero. And for longtime listeners, you guys know we love to start the episode with a little segment called
You Were Saying,
where we look at comic books and movies that were on the shelf the same month that the issue in question hit the stands. In this case, G.I. Joe 30 hit the stands in December of 1984. So we're rounding out a strong year in comic books we're heading into an amazing year for DC Comics, and that's where we always start. So we're going to take a first look at DC Comics and Justice League of America number 233. Ladies and gentlemen, Vibe has joined the team. That's right. If you were here last month, if you heard issue 29, it was kind of the final regular issue of the traditional Justice League of America. They introduced the Justice League Detroit era in the annual 2 months ago, but this is the actual regular ongoing issue that they really told their ongoing story and slipped them into the actual series themselves. And it's part 1 of 4 interlocking covers. One would feature Vibe, and then Gypsy, and then Commander Steel, and then I think the final one was Vixen. I'm not sure what order that was in, but the first one we get Vibe, who is the breakdancing Latino who was just a walking stereotype, but I gotta love him. So if you guys watch the WB show, specifically Flash, you know that Barry Allen's partner at Star Labs is a guy named Cisco. Cisco is Vibe. In the show, he's amazing. Like, he's a great. The actor's fantastic, and the storyline they've given him has been really great. How he developed his powers, and he's got a little bit different powers, not just vibration, but like interdimensional powers. However, 1984 wasn't as kind to stereotypes, and Vibe was a garishly clad breakdancing Latino kid from the streets who spoke in just stereotyped slang and was terrible. Like, there is no dancing around the fact that Vibe was like one of the worst character finds of the 1980s. And when they, spoiler alert, kill him in about 2 years, there's no surprise, nor should there be any shame behind getting rid of Vibe. Now, they brought him back in the New 52, and that version matched what they would eventually do on The Flash a little closer. So any good character can be redeemed. And I truly do believe that. That's what they always say when you kill someone in comic books, like kill them for real, kill them. It's always disappointing because every character is just waiting for the right writer or creative team or artist to come along and revive them. And in Vibe's case, it certainly was true. It just took 30 some years. So yeah, it's Justice League of America 233. Vibe. Fantastic. Legion of Superheroes number 5. Guys, this is the Baxter series. Last month we talked in depth about the cover with blood dripping down Karate Kid's hand because he done died. This month is just as amazing. This is the issue where Princess Projectra, I can never say Projectra straight with I can write it, can't pronounce it. Princess Projectra gets her revenge in this issue, and it's awesome. The cover's great. It's kind of like it's a early precursor to that really black heavy look of Giffen that he would lean into. He's this early days of Legion. He was coming out of his more cartoony stuff, and then it would eventually the book itself goes to Steve Lytle. But then the next time you see Giffen, it's kind of a more stylized version. This I'm talking about like towards the issues 40s, like late 40s, issue 50s, and into the Magic Wars stuff on Legion. I'm getting into real Legion minutia here, kids, so bear with me for a second. And then my favorite Giffen stuff is the 5 year later, and which I always thought was a nice kind of combination of the two styles, because he did a lot of heavy blacks in this era, this kind of smooth cartoonish look. And this cover is a precursor to what he would eventually do in the 5 year gap version, which would come in like 4 years, I think. So it's great. It's Princess standing on top of like a pile of bodies while Chameleon and Shrinking Violet and Element Lad like look on in terror because she gone nuts because someone killed her man. Legion of Superheroes Baxter series issue number 5, guys. Again, I'm going to say it, put it out there in the world. We need an omnibus of the Baxter series. We need an omnibus of all Legion. I know the second one just came out. We need to make sure they keep doing it. Oh, The Flash, number 340. This is the trial of the Flash. So now, if you guys remember, about a year ago, I think it was, maybe a little longer. And again, when I speak in year, I'm talking not our time, but like in comic time. About a year earlier, Flash had killed the Reverse Flash, Professor Zoom, because Zoom earlier had killed Barry's, well, for a lot of reasons. He had killed Iris years earlier, and he was about to kill Barry's Fiona Webb, Barry's current paramour, as they were going to get married. and Zoom was going to kill her. So Barry caught up to him and snapped his neck, and the world saw it. And so he's on trial for killing Professor Zoom. And they kind of put him in jail, and then this and that. And I remember reading an article about this at some point in the recent past, where basically the guys at the guys working on the Flash, and I'm talking about Carrie Bates and Carmine Infantino, who are amazing talents, absolutely amazing talents. They were not given, they kind of, I think they, at some point near this time, near the start of the Flash trial, they were told that something bad was going to go down with Flash within the next year. And I'm talking about Crisis, because Crisis is getting ready to start up, right? And Flash dies, what was it, Crisis 8? So they started the trial, but then I think it got delayed because the production of Crisis was delayed. And so what you end up with is this really bloated trial of the Flash storyline that lasted at least a full year. And actually going back to when he's first arrested, it definitely lasts way over a year. And that was because editorial-wise, they were trying to line up when his book would end with whatever was going to happen. I think they weren't necessarily told that he was going to die in Crisis, but just that the book itself was going to be like reimagined. Flash himself was. And so they kept having to drag it out. If you guys know anything about like the Spider-Man clone saga, that would happen, 10 years after this. Similar kind of story where they're like, hey, let's do this idea, and then for whatever reason it picked up steam, or it was popular, or they just needed to drag it out. And then for Spider-Man, the clone saga got crazier and crazier. Same thing was happening apparently back in the day to Flash, and so they just kept kind of adding to it and adding to it. So what you end up with is this really big bloated story, but ultimately at the heart it's great. Like the Flash, trial of the Flash, and the whole thing that he went through, starting with killing Zoom like a year earlier, is wonderful, and there's really great drama and stuff. But when you read it like issue on issue, and you could imagine the time, the issue's only coming out once a month, it just must have taken forever. Like it must have just been ponderously slow to get through. Having said that, I dig it, and I think it reads. I did read it as an adult. It reads much better like in like sequential sittings. But I can't imagine this going on month. But this issue is great. And as always, guys, the covers, Flash covers, in this case by Carmine Infantino and Klaus Janson. Flash covers are always awesome, always fun. Infantino is just like the perennial Barry Allen Flash artist for like the 70s and 80s. Just absolutely great. And this one's awesome. It's all text. Flash has got great covers in general that really literally speak to the reader. Like they say a lot of stuff tells the reader how to feel, or they kind of break the fourth wall. It's a rich tradition in Flash comics, and this one is one of the examples of it. It's not super detailed conceptually. It is just a bunch of words on the page, but I think it works absolutely what you need here, because the trial begins. Like it's awesome. So there you go. Flash 340. Check that out if you can. And I'm going to say that's it for DC. There's some other good stuff that came out this month. Green Lantern 183, last issue, we talked about John Stewart making his return. This is like he's actually featured on the cover, which is fantastic. So there's a lot of good stuff. The Man-Bat reprints, like special edition Man-Bat stuff. The first reprint issue of that series came out this month, and this reprints the old Neil Adams stuff. So there's some good stuff, but DC as a whole, it's definitely ready for that Crisis. It's ready for that line refresh, and so we're getting there. So hey, Marvel Comics,
you were saying,
and here it is, guys. By far the winner book of the month, Secret Wars number 8. You know what this is. This is the first in continuity appearance of the black costume. Now, they debuted the actual look about 8 months earlier in Amazing Spider-Man. It was a 256 or 252 or something like that. And it appeared in Spectacular and Marvel Team Up and all that. But Marvel Superheroes number 8, when it comes to collecting, this is one of those weirdo things about comic books. People consider this the first appearance of the black costume. It's not really the first appearance of black costume at all. It's the Spider-Man 252. But this is the one where he gets it. So this one, for whatever reason, this is considered the really good book to get. It's got a brilliant Mike Zeck cover. And we know something about Mike Zeck covers because he did cover this month's G.I. Joe. It's Spidey in the black suit on the front. You've seen it reprinted a million different ways. It is awesome. It's when we learn that how he got it, that he was trying to get he saw Thor walk out of a room, and Thor had a brand new outfit on, and Thor said, "Hey, there's a haberdasher in there." And so Spider-Man went to the wrong machine. Of course, Parker Luck, he grabs the wrong machine, and he, instead of getting a costume that looks like his, he gets one that he was mentally a little influenced by Spider-Woman's costume. She had been running around in a black and white spider-looking costume. So, but it's a machine that in this case was holding as a specimen an alien symbiote. So it's pretty neat, pretty great book. I'm not sure what else to say. If you're a comic collector, you don't have yourself a copy of Secret Wars #8, you gotta get one. Get yourself a Secret Wars #8. Whatever you're paying right now, you could probably pay about $80 for it. That's a good price. Anything below that's a better price. Don't pay more than $100. You can get yourself a really good copy of Secret Wars #8, and then hold on to it. It's always going to be a great book. Another amazing book this month, guys. Thor 350. We talked a bunch about this last month. This is a big culmination for the Simonson run. Malekith the Accursed, who you guys all saw in the second Thor movie, Malekith had been running around Earth with the Casket of Ancient Winters. He had unleashed a perpetual snowstorm all over the globe. This crossed over into the Avengers, the Fantastic Four, a bunch of other books. And this is Thor and Beta Ray Bill going to war with Malekith for the stakes of the Earth. It's fantastic. And it's Simonson. Lettered by John Workman, my absolute all-time favorite letterer in all of comics history. Thor 350 is just a wonderful book. And what was so great about this is it seeded stories to come. So you might think, if you got a guy like Simonson, yeah, he tells a great story, and okay, great, they're leading up to this big climactic battle, and that's awesome. But within this story, he dropped a bunch of seeds, and I think Hama does this too, to a certain degree. Simonson would drop a bunch of seeds in this Thor story where there was a bunch of soldiers that died, American soldiers. Well, fast forward, I think maybe 6 months or whatever, and it led to another epic story where Thor had to go into hell to rescue the soldiers that died during this adventure. And that story itself was a big deal. Like and actually, to be honest, that story was some of the stuff you saw in Thor Ragnarok. So that kind of like perpetual sequential storytelling, that's what I love about comic books, man. That is it. To know when you're writing this, you're not just writing for the trade. You're not just writing to make this issue the absolute greatest thing ever. You're going to do that, but you're also going to have these seeds of ideas that either you or maybe another writer or someone else down the road, the creator, is going to pick up, and they're going to tell a whole different story. And in that case, the other story was also freaking great, and it took nothing away from this movie. It's one of the reasons why I love the Marvel movies. People bash on that. If they're like, no, they set up all these other movies. Well, most of the time, setup in the other movies takes about 2 minutes away from the current movie you're watching, and it just leads you to more awesomeness. That's what I love about comic books, guys. That is what comic books are all about. And speaking of Thor, Spider-Man teams up with Thor in Marvel Team Up number 148. It's got an awesome cover by Al Milgrom with Thor having flung his hammer and Spider-Man holding on to it. So lest you think Spider-Man's able to lift it, he can't. He's just holding on to Thor's hammer. And man, check out Alpha Flight 17. It's the X-Men versus Alpha Flight, a recreation of Byrne's original introduction of Vindicator cover when he was known as Weapon Alpha, and it's awesome. So it's like Byrne revisiting Byrne just a few years later. This is one of the few. It's weird. Alpha Flight doesn't have a lot of very expensive issues. I think because it was a John Byrne book, they printed a lot of them. And even though there are a lot of Alpha Flight fans there's always still just, you could always get a good Alpha Flight collection pretty handily. It's not that hard to get a hand on. But this one and the one from a couple issues back, I want to say maybe it was 14. It's one when Wolverine first as solo comes back because James Hudson died, so he comes back for his funeral. Those are like the only 2 issues. Well, I guess the first Jim Lee one, whenever Jim Lee came on it, the issue 60s or something like that. Those are the only ones really that are kind of worth anything when it comes to Alpha Flight. But this one's great. And this cover, I haven't looked at this cover in a long time. It is gorgeous, man. It is really, really good looking cover. Alpha Flight 17. Captain America 300 is this month, everybody. This is a good month for Marvel. It's Captain America versus Red Skull with a Mike Zeck cover. Mike Zeck is all over Marvel Comics this month. The Red Skull fights Cap to the death, to the Skull's death. They actually would really write Skull out of the book for a good number of years, which was cool because they used him a lot, and so it gave Cap's Rogues Gallery some room to grow. You know, you also had Avengers 250. That's a solid anniversary. It's just a solid anniversary month. All these 250s and 300s and all that stuff. Beauty and the Beast #1. I know what you're thinking. Is it about the Disney story? Is it about the TV show? No, it is about. They paired up romantically Hank McCoy, the Beast from the X-Men, and Allison Blair, the Dazzler. And they gave them their own 4-issue miniseries. They had previously teamed them up in the Dazzler's comic book and kind of flirted with it. And so this was them testing out to see, could they sustain their own romance comic? They couldn't, gotta be honest. It's not a great series. Although Bill Sienkiewicz did the covers and they were dope. But Ann Nesenti wrote it, and she's talented, don't get me wrong. Don Perlin penciled it and stuff. But ultimately, there wasn't a huge demand. I think they fought Dr. Doom. I believe that's Doom on the cover. But it never really went anywhere. But issue 1, it was on the stands this month. Yeah, it's a good time. It was a real good time for Marvel. It really was. So that's it for Marvel Comics.
You were saying?
Now, at the movie theater, we had a few really solid films in December of '84. First of which is an absolute all-time classic. December 5th, Beverly Hills Cop, the first one. Come on. That's a great movie. Eddie Murphy, Judge Reinhold, just a great movie. If you haven't revisited Beverly Hills Cop, the sequel I think was flashier but not as solid of a film, and then part 3 was terrible. So it was directed by Martin Brest. Martin Brest would go on to direct Midnight Run. Midnight Run, one of the greatest films of all time, and it shows. Beverly Hills Cop is an amazing movie. So revisit that if you haven't watched it in a long time, and don't fall for a banana in a tailpipe. 2 days later, the sequel to 2001 came out. 2010, the year we make contact. The sequel to the amazing Kubrick, groundbreaking film. Sequel ain't great. I remember this being on a million times when I was a kid, and I knew enough about movies to know that it was a sequel to, at the time, what I would just have considered that big, long, probably boring thought of as a kid, although now I get it. 2001's amazing. I'm a big fan, don't get me wrong. But at the time, I was just oh, this is an important movie. And I remember being bored to death by 2010. So I have not revisited this movie in a long, long time. But I remember it was on HBO just a ton. Roy Scheider's great. And I loved Roy Scheider from Jaws. So I was the guy from Jaws? Yeah. Oh, no, not for me. But I would like to revisit 2010 as an adult. I had the comic book, and the comic book is terrible. But City Heat also came out on December 7th. And I love Burt Reynolds. Love Clint Eastwood. This movie, not that good. However, this is the movie that I guess Reynolds he got hit with a chair or something on the set of this movie, and it screwed his jaw up, and gave him like TMJ or something. My understanding of the story is that Burt's Burt, so he never really got treatment for it because he just thought, I'll be fine. And it would go on to kind of cripple him socially / work-wise, because he would just always have this facial tic, and that's one of the reasons why his output declined dramatically in the late 80s and 90s. That and poor choices like the movie Malone. But you understand what I'm saying. If you Google it, he's talked about it in more recent interviews a lot. When Boogie Nights came out, I think is kind of when he first started talking about this, that he suffered an injury on City Heat. So if I could go back in time, I would just tell them either don't do City Heat or work harder on City Heat to make it an amazing movie that's worth the loss of one of cinema's all-time great icons, Burt Reynolds. Anyway, 7 days later, December 14th, Dune, guys. David Lynch. David Lynch is amazing. Dune, the movie, not so much. My understanding is Jodorowsky's Dune would have been Cuckoo Town as well. Who knows how it would have turned out. That documentary I need to see. It's on my list. I have not seen it yet. But funny story about Dune. In college, I was in a sci-fi literature class, and we were supposed to read the book Dune. And I was not a big fan of it. It just wasn't singing to me. So I didn't read it. The homework, of course. And we thought that we would rent the movie Dune. knowing that it was nowhere close to what the book was, but we needed to get at least a passing knowledge of sandworms and spice miners. So we three of us sat down to watch it. We all were in the same class, and one of our buddies fell asleep pretty early on in the movie. And the other buddy and I, we looked at each other, like kind of give a knowing nod, fast forwarded to the very, 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 very final like 2 minutes of the movie, and then nudged our and changed any visible clocks in the room to like 2 hours later, nudged our friend Eric Tucker awake. Eric, if you're listening. And Swiss and I turned to Eric and go, that was amazing. You just sleep through the whole thing? He's like, yeah. Oh my God, what did I miss? And we proceeded to describe the movie Dune to Eric in completely false terms. I don't remember what we said, but we just made stuff up, and we didn't tell him till after class was done. He thought, our version of Dune was it. Anyway, also that day though is an amazing John Carpenter movie called Starman. The comic book, everyone always says, is one of my favorite things of all time, and everyone always says, oh, is that like the movie Starman? I go, no, totally different. But Starman the movie is on its own right really, really cool. John was playing with a lot of really high concept stuff. Of course, Karen Allen and Jeff Bridges, and Bridges is a spaceman, lands on Earth, and he, I believe, so Karen Allen's husband had passed away, so he assumes the form of him. It's a really, really high concept, real think piece kind of movie. It didn't resonate hugely with audiences, but John Carpenter is absolutely one of the great directors of our time. He's a wonderful dude. And this movie is fantastic. December 14th, 1984. Oh, there's a bunch of good stuff. December 17th is the movie The River with Mel Gibson and Sissy Spacek. That was a solid flick. On December 21st, you have The Flamingo Kid with Matt Dillon and as like a player hookup guy. That movie was always on HBO. I've seen that a million times. Mickey and Maude came out. That movie was really stupid and fun. Blake Edwards, was an amazing slapstick guy, known primarily for the Pink Panther movies. But Johnny Dangerously, everybody. Johnny Dangerously. The parody film of like the 30s gangsters with Batman himself, Michael Keaton. I love this movie. You get the opportunity to see this movie once. That's all I'm going to say. Go see Johnny Dangerously. It's absolutely brilliant. It's directed by Amy Heckerling. I never realized she directed that movie. It's so good. It is such a good movie. Go see Johnny Dangerously. And that's all, guys. That's all the time we have today for...
You were saying?
Now it's time to dig into G.I. Joe. That's the landscape. That is what was going on when G.I. Joe number 30 hit the stands. So, hit it, Destro.
Premature panic is the sign of an immature mind.
Okay, I'll take your note and slow down then. G.I. Joe 30, covered by Mike Zeck and John Beatty. We've got the Dreadnoks, Buzzer, Ripper, and Torch tearing up the tail end of a Sky Striker. Now, we know this happens at McGuire Air Force Base, but the cover is just dynamic and awesome. Now, the Dreadnoks were introduced a few issues back, like in the pages of the book, but this is their like cover debut, so to speak. And Mike Zeck, on what we learned today, was like his 5th cover of the month at Marvel. Just did a wonderful job with it. Everyone's clearly drawn, matches their toys. You clearly see their weaponry, which, for me was what defined them, primarily, although obviously brunette, blonde, brown, was black haired, I guess. It always bothered me that brunettes and people with black hair, there's no name. Why is a brunette and not brown haired, and black haired is black haired, not like, I don't know what, indigoette or something? I don't get it. And blonde is kind of yellow haired, but black, you see where I'm going with this, kids? I need some clarity, and I've always bothered me. So someone who has black hair, are they not a brunette? They are brunette, right? So you got a brunette mohawked and a brunette torch Ripper, and a brunette torch and a blonde Buzzer. But either way, they're all, they're featured, and the Dreadnoks are fantastic, and you clearly see their toys, and they're tearing up your favorite toy and mine, the Sky Striker. This is a great cover. I got to tell you, the only thing I think, and I would wonder if they toyed with it, but it would have covered too much of the logo, is if the tail of the Sky Striker that's getting cut off by Buzzer, if that overlapped the G.I. Joe logo. And I wonder if that originally was the plan, because it looks like it's designed to do that, and that would be just awesome. But it would really obscure a lot, like almost nearly a third of the logo would be covered up. And so I have a feeling they wouldn't have wanted to do that. But it's a great looking cover.
Yo, Joe!
And here we go. The issue is called Darkness, which is an interesting title, I gotta say. It's an odd title for this. Now, I think this definitely is a Cobra Spotlight issue. And that's probably where the title comes from. You listeners know, so I do a read-through, and I kind of gather my thoughts, look for any, obvious concepts I want to dig into. And then as I record, I kind of, take each page on its own again, like as a quick, as like a really deep down. And my first time through, it didn't ping me. But yeah, this one's called Darkness. That's kind of cool. Like I do think that it matches the overall ominous tone of it, because G.I. Joe's barely in this issue. And that was what I did notice as I was doing my read through. Like, yeah, this really is a Cobra Spotlight issue. The Joes really hardly have anything to do until you get to the end. You get a little fight and save the day. Written by Larry Hama, Frank Springer back on pencils, Andy Mashinsky on inks. Also on inks is a guy by the name of Pat Redding. He inked pages 2 through 6. Rick Parker on letters. George Roussos did the colors. Denny O'Neil editing. And Jim Shooter editing in chief. So we're opening on the Dreadnoks and Zartan hanging out outside of McGuire Air Force Base. And as they're hanging out, they see that a Dragonfly is landing, and a Dragonfly has also been shot up. And they can see that they're it's got the bullet holes in it, and the guys can see that from where they're standing. Now, McGuire is not actually G.I. Joe's headquarters. We know that. They don't know that, though. But it's still a military Air Force base. And security at the time, in 1984, was so lax that 4 thugs with obvious weaponry could just hang out on the side of the fence watching planes go in and out. And no one from the airport security comes out to bother them. At no point does anyone come by the fence and is like, hey, dudes, what's going on? Like, I'm not even saying they didn't notice the Cobra tattoos and obvious carrying machine guns and shotguns and knives, but there's just no investigation. That's really funny to me. What is great about this page, though, is all the toyetic stuff. Now, we never did get like Dreadnought motorcycles. I think there was a Dreadnought trike at some point down the road, but like, legit motorcycles for the first dudes. But if you look close, you see that Buzzer is carrying that, what would you call it? Like a nunchuck with a knife, like a round knife on it. Like they give that to his character. Really cool, because it's like making sure that, yeah, these guys come with all the accessories you get in the toy. I like that a lot. In Zartan, he's carrying the pistol that he came with. Like they're like action figures come to life on this page. It's a great way to introduce them, for sure.
Yo, Joe!
I would have loved some Dreadnought motorcycles. That would have been dope. So they do a good job on these pages of name-checking everybody, except for Torch. Torch does not get properly name-checked. On the first page, you have Ripper, back checking on Buzzer's comment. And then on this page, you have Zartan telling Ripper to shut up. And then Torch talks to Buzzer and calls him Buzzer. But then Buzzer never speaks back to Torch to name him Torch. So I feel like Torch is getting the kind of the short end of the stick here as far as character identification goes. And this, follows the logic of that Marvel absolutely was doing at the time, and they should have kept doing forever and ever and ever. I think every comic book should, treating each comic as if it's someone's first. And so when you're introducing people in the book, they should be name checked. If they're going to be a part of it. If they're just background, that's fine. But if they're going to be a main part of the plot, which in this case they are, they should be name checked within the first few pages. And we're going to count. We're going to see till what page do we get Torch actually named, because he is overlooked in these first couple pages. We definitely have a separate inker here, guys. Now, last issue, one of the things that we ran into that I thought I properly recognized was that there might have been a little rush job going on in that issue. And some of the things that stood out to me were the lack of attention to detail and backgrounds. And we're seeing that in a big way on these issues. And it also goes back to the credits box, which said that Pat Redding inked pages 2 through 6. And it's no comment at all on the quality of Pat's inks. I think some of this stuff is really nice work. But you can see specifically in this first panel, there's zero background work done. There's like just a little bit of cloud work but that's in coloring. That's the colorist like kind of making a change in the background, and that might even be just a printing error where they outlined Zartan, because it looks like it could be clouds, but then it doesn't cover the rest of the panel. Then you look at the second picture of Zartan, his arm doesn't even have any like the outside of his arm is not even delineated. It just, his hand kind of parallels butts into the end of the panel. So there's a lot going on this page that tells me this might have been a rush job, specifically because they would have brought in another inker and said, hey, we got to get this done real quick. So we might have been once again running up to the dreaded deadline doom. Now, within that, I like some of this character work, guys. I do. I really do. I think the body work on the guys in the third panel, is that? I think that's some pretty slick body work. I like I just like the line work. I like the energy behind it, and it's probably because it's really loose pencils by Springer, but there's an energy that comes with a pre-inked pencil job that the best inking tries to keep that energy alive, and some of the worst penciling kind of deadens things, and you'll see that the more you read comics and kind of dig into that. So you want to try to keep some of that energy, but also form and shape and make important the parts of the page that really deserve to be seen very clearly. This fourth panel is another one of those things where there's just like the heavy black, but then lack of detail in the background. It's not a lot going on here as far as like, it's perfect for telling the story. That's what I think works on this. But it's just there's a quickness to this page. Now, seeing Zartan's like metamorphosis into what would be a Colonel Hawk at this point. He's not a general, because they say that he's got colonel's worth of brass hanging off the Class A's. Class A's being the name, and we learned that from Mark Bellomo's notes in this issue. The name of his uniform, and Hawk salutes the guys and walks on past. So this is a great use of Zartan's technology and abilities.
Yo, Joe!
Now, this first panel, this is kind of the example I'm talking about. I like the detail on Hawk's face, or Zartan Hawk's face, Zar Hawk's face. But then the one MP, or AP rather, is they just covered his face in black. Like, that's just not good. It's hard, like there's definitely some corner cutting happening on this issue, guys, for sure. Very visible in the second panel on this one as well. It's not much of a tarmac drawn out. It feels like the lines that were inked were just kind of like guidelines. That's what it looks like to me. It looks like the guidelines that Springer was using to like rough out the action in that panel were translated into like tarmac strips, which is just a weird look for what makes the tarmac look like a basketball court, is what I'm saying, guys. Anyway, forget all that. Let's focus on the good here, and the good is that General Hawk walks right by Doc and Wild Bill. Wild Bill had been shot up a little bit, and as he goes by Doc, he just refers to Wild Bill as Trooper. And Doc's like, "You'd think you didn't know your name, Wild Bill." And Wild Bill just passed it off as, the man's got a lot on his mind. Leave him alone. Because Wild Bill's not a jerk. Wild Bill's not going to call him out on it. But I like that Doc's suspicious. Because, he's a doctor. He's smart. He's paid to notice those things. So I like that it's Doc who kind of notices something is amiss. This says they're transporting Bill to the ambulance.
Yo, Joe!
Meanwhile, on Staten Island, we've got Fred, who was introduced last issue, moving into his new home with his fake family, his Cobra family. And this is on Staten Island. Now we know Staten Island is where Fort Wadsworth is, and that's where the Joes are headquarters. So Cobra Commander has set up Fred to kind of surveil Staten Island, because that's the last time when they fought at the pit and everything. He's pretty sure they operate around that area, so he's going to set up Fred and his family. Here's a continuity glitch, or again, maybe they didn't make the choice to kind of label all of them the same. But last issue, it was last name Smith. When he introduced himself to the realtor, he called himself Mr. Broca. Now that also could easily be no prized. You know, if you guys remember the Marvel no prizes, you could easily no prize it and say that he purchased it under the pseudonym last name of Broca in order for the to have like a different paper trail. But then, you know, in the neighborhood, he would be known as Fred Smith, etc., so on. But we do need to point out that he is going by a different last name than they introduced him the previous issue. It's great. And I love that we get a little shot of Cobra Commander chit-chatting on the phone. He knows that Maguire was where the plane that carried him as prisoner about 6 issues ago. That's where the plane took off. So he knows that's where he wants surveilled, and he's talking to Zartan, right? So Fred's off doing his own thing, and Cobra Commander is giving Zartan some instructions. So he wants the Dreadnoks to keep an eye on Maguire Air Force Base. Yo, Joe! Now, Zartan is and the Dreadnoks are holed up at this Watash Speed Shop here. It's like semi-abandoned, quasi-abandoned gas station, but it's got a functional payphone, right? There is functional soda machines because Torch is drinking something that looks like he grabbed it from a vending machine. I don't know if we get the gasoline used at all. So my question is, even if it's a rundown gas station, what happened to the proprietors? Did they work for Cobra? Did the Dreadnoks kill them? Did they tie them up and truss them up? But either way, Zartan in this panel, on this page, takes over this gas station. This is not like Zartan's existing gas station. Although Buzzers does say that more suitable lodgings would seem to be in order. And Ripper gets the first mention of a fridge full of grape soda and chocolate covered donuts, which is fantastic. If you don't know what that is absolutely the Dreadnoughts' favorite thing to eat. It's what we had here when we did the G.I. Joe movie last year. We treated ourselves to a lovely repast of chocolate covered donuts and grape soda. And Zartan uses his technology, his Mirage technology, to make this gas station look like the shack in Florida that they just abandoned. So the joke there being, you think that the Dreadnoks are asking for nicer lodgings, but in fact, they actually are saying, we're used to even worse than this, so can we please get that back? Now, still haven't mentioned who Torch is, though, guys. So we still have not named Torch in this issue. Just saying. Yo, Joe! Oh, and a quick note from the wonderful notes of Mark Bellomo in the back of the IDW book. Apparently, Larry got the idea for the chocolate donuts from the SNL, the amazing Saturday Night Live sketch with John Belushi when he's the runner and the marathon runner, and it's like a fake commercial. And he says that he gets all his energy from donuts, and he just is eating donuts as he's running around an Olympic track. It's one of my favorite commercials, like fake parody commercials that SNL ever did. I never knew that was the source of origin for this until I was reading these books just this week. And I love it. I love that influenced this. And we know that Larry had his finger on the pulse of that stuff. He was watching SNL and he was really digging pop culture at the time. So that's freaking hilarious to me that's where he got the inspiration for the donuts. That's so great. Now, we cut back over to Fred and we get all of his stuff being moved in by their storage. They move fast. They just closed on that house and they got all the stuff getting moved out today. And we see that even with their kids, their pseudo quote kids playing around the house, they're unloading rocket launchers and rifles and all this advanced surveillance equipment, and they're going to surveil Fort Wadsworth to see if anything crazy comes in and out, and they're assuming they're going to be there for months, right? And I love just the pacing of this issue is great, because like right when they get everything set up, or at least starting to get set up, we've got the Joes come in, and Fred's even looking out the window in one of his binoculars, and the Joes are coming through, but they're in regular ambulances, and this is the Wild Bill and Doc, and so it's like there's this great sense of timing in this issue where they're looking right at the Joes and they're there, but since they don't have the rest of the surveillance stuff set up, they don't know that those are Joes, and it's going to pay off big time as the issue proceeds. Yo, Joe! And this is our first real trip back to the pit. Maybe 9 issues or something like that. If you remember, was it 19 or 18 when the pit got destroyed? And we checked in on it a couple times, I guess, like real briefly to say, hey, we're working on it. We're kind of revamping it. And they even showed us like what the new layout plans would be. but it's really been under construction. And that's why they were at Alcatraz to keep Cobra Commander, or Storm Shadow rather. That's why they were in the High Sierras to keep Cobra Commander in the fake base set up, because the pit itself was under construction. They didn't have a safe place to hold them. So as we revisit it here, this is our first real trip back to the Joe's home base. And we can see in this last panel on this page that even now it's still not full. You could see that there's loose like wall panels, that they're still not fully together. So it's, the guys have really been working hard for months. This is like 6 months later after that. Like they've really been still busting away and getting it in the quote unquote new pit. Now I think that's Short Fuse in the glasses down there. I'm not exactly sure, but it's Doc and Clutch, and they're giving Wild Bill a spin to the medical levels.
Yo, Joe!
And I love this tease here that we talk about maybe Doc can get Wild Bill back on his feet in time for the opening ceremonies. We're talking about the opening of the pit. And they say it's coming up in G.I. Joe number 33. Don't miss it. So they are looking ahead on that, and to the big grand opening. That's going to be really exciting. Now, in walks Hawk, and Doc and Wild Bill are properly surprised, because they say you were back at McGuire not more than 20 minutes ago. Scarlet backs up Hawk. He's been with her all day. Then who did Wild Bill and Doc see out at McGuire? I love that picture of Hawk, guys. That picture of Hawk is awesome. Like that's a good looking Frank Springer Hawk. And what's absolutely brilliant about the storytelling technique that Hama's using on the bottom of this page is Hawk is asking the question, who did Wild Bill and Doc see out at McGuire? And Cobra Commander is answering it for us. And for the reader and for everyone involved, the first word he says is Zartan. Period. This is Cobra Commander. Do you copy? So who did Wild Bill see out at McGuire? The answer is Zartan. Of course he did. This is absolutely great. Also a sign of Cobra Commander's just being wrong. Like, he is, quote, convinced that McGuire Field's location of the Joe headquarters. We know he's just wrong.
Yo, Joe!
Meanwhile, the Arbco Brothers Circus, is heading towards McGuire Air Force Base. And so we've got another case of like that Broca / Arbco. And now we know that they're running a circus in giant circus trucks. And this is how they transport all of their HISS tanks and all of their high armament, just their heavy weaponry around America in these giant circus trucks. And we check in on the little boy back from issue number 10, who we know is named Billy. And I believe this is the first time he gets named Billy, because he's looking through some files while the circus is out of town. And Major Blood, who we saw last issue, Baroness spring from jail, Major Blood and Baroness bust in on him looking through these files. And Baroness says, "What would you do, Billy? Try to harm our precious Cobra Commander?" I'm pretty sure that's the first time he's named Billy, guys. And if you're a patron, you heard last issue we talked about when they brought Billy back. I'm not sure if Larry knew exactly where he was going with this. Because remember, it ties in a lot with the Return of the Jedi. It's the Year of Jedi and all that stuff. So the concept of is he or isn't he his father was in the air. And Billy's talking about things that Cobra Commander did to his dad. And here, Baroness also refers to it. Billy has an attitude problem. He resents what Cobra did to his father. So I'm really wondering what I'm interested, let's just say, to see how this plays out. And we all know that this is Cobra Commander's kid, but how did this play out month on month? At what point does that really get cemented? And I'm wondering at this point, did they just have an idea for that, or were we still operating under the "you wronged my dad" storyline that was introduced way back in issue 10? And I truly don't believe that he was supposed to be Cobra Commander's kid when they first introduced him. I think it was a pretty straightforward, this guy screwed my family over, I'm going to get some revenge.
Yo, Joe!
And Zartan's working the phone lines, talking to Cobra Commander, and Commander gets very clear in his orders. Cut the fence towers and don't get carried away. Perimeter the fence and cut a hole in the fence, and that's it. Don't do anything else. Cobra Commander is a stickler for details, what Zartan says, which is so funny because he's kind of right. Like, Cobra Commander is a stickler for detail in the sense that he wants you to do exactly what he says, but his plans always go so poorly, and there's something just goes so wrong, and maybe it's just a bad management style. Meanwhile, under the darkness cover, Fred is finally set up with their snooping equipment, which is a full-on bank of computers at this house. This is the house near Staten Island, or on Staten Island, near the chaplain's assistant motor pool. And they finally have it set up. The wife is looking like a fashion model in her chair, all happy and ready to go with all the surveillance stuff. And he gets a phone call telling him to curtail his activities because Cobra Commander found the G.I. Joe headquarters, so all the CGs have been recalled. So all the Crimson Guardsmen were recalled. And this last panel is hilarious. These two proceed to just destroy all the equipment they've just spent hours putting together. So my question is, guys, I get you're frustrated, and I understand that it took you hours to put it together, but you don't think Cobra would want you to spend another few hours to meticulously take it apart so that they can use it elsewhere? Like, you're just wasting a lot of money here, guys. And frankly, for an accountant, for a company built on like pyramid schemes and tracking money, I feel like they would not like that.
Yo, Joe!
And this is where it gets great. This is what I'm talking about earlier when I said the timing of this. They just get everything set up. They get the call. Their anger destroys it. And right when that happens, a Vamp, a Mobat, a Wolverine, an APC, and probably Rock and Roll on the motorcycle, the Ram, they come flying out of Fort Wadsworth on their way to McGuire because there's a word of trouble. Well, because Hawk knew that there was an impersonator over at McGuire. So right when they blow all that stuff up, that's when the Joes decide to leave. It's great. Like, the Joes are kind of the foil to this story. Like, this really is such a Cobra-centric issue that the Joes are even operating thematically and like storytelling-wise in the reverse role, where they're only used to occasionally foil what the bad guys are up to. Yeah, it's great. It's just so smart. And meanwhile, the Dreadnoks are tearing up the fence, which is what they were told to do. Let's be fair here. So they name check, hey, Ripper, why don't you rip a hole in the fence? Now, Torch says, again, not named, Torch's big idea to let's go on the airfield and burn, cut, buzz, and saw and all that. Let's go have some fun. And the guys are like, okay, yeah, that sounds like a great idea.
Yo, Joe!
I like this. We can't have no candy pants riding with the Dreadnoks. And they're talking, so let's see. So Torch offered the idea. It was Ripper that said, Zartan told us not to. And Buzzer accused Ripper of turning sissy on him. And then Torch followed it up with, we can't have no candy pants riding with the Dreadnoks. Oh, wait a minute. This doesn't even work, guys. Because let's look at the previous page. Blonde hair is saying you turning sissy on us. Huh. Yeah, there's some problematic word balloon stuff going on here. Because the way that the three Dreadnoks speak in this top panel belies the fact that one of them was called the sissy in the previous panel, because they're all talking as if they're all on board. That's really funny. Yeah, so I'm not sure who they were supposed to be talking to, calling them the sissy, but I dig it. It's fun. Let's see here. Do we still have any mention of Torch? What they're doing is they're tearing up all the, starting with the Dragonfly. They're tearing up a Vamp that was parked there. But I don't know what a Vamp's doing there. But there's later on they talk about there's a section that's cordoned off to the G.I. Joe team. So maybe they do have a Vamp, keep some tanks and stuff parked there. We end up with, they're just tearing up all the web. And they're tearing up all the toys that you had at home, guys.
Yo, Joe!
Meanwhile, the Joe team's trucking along on the Channel Bridge between Staten Island and New Jersey. They said, we're moving a lot of heavy equipment on rather flimsy evidence, Hawk. And Hawk says, better safe than sorry. Meanwhile, we see Cobra unloading their own heavy equipment at McGuire Air Force Base. We got 2 HISS tanks and 2 Fang helicopters. That is important. It's going to come into play later, the 2 HISS tanks, because there's, again, counting issues going on in this issue that has to be covered up by a text dialogue. We'll get there when we get there. But we've got these nice 3 large panels just to give us a quick update on where everyone's at. Joes are on their way. Cobra's there and unloading. And then we get a quick glimpse of Cobra Commander kind of giving the overall. This is what we're up to, guys. Last time they did a full frontal assault. This time we're just kind of going to sneak in the back. They don't realize that the Dreadnoks are on the airfield kind of destroying everything already.
Yo, Joe!
They find the hole in the fence. But at the same time, Buzzer is slicing through the strut on the Sky Striker, and when that happens, the Sky Striker falls and explodes. Now, that is the most volatile Sky Striker I could possibly imagine. I don't know. I don't know enough about airplanes, guys. Is it protocol to keep a plane fully fueled with super, super, super flammable jet fuel while it's just parked on the tarmac? I'm not sure that it is, but in this case it was, and it goes up like a Roman candle. We see the guys in the tower talking about right in the middle of the G.I. Joe security area. That is what we were talking about earlier, and like why there could be a vamp that's just parked there hanging out. So they do definitely have an area that's cordoned off for them, and to sound the alert with a direct line to the pit.
Yo, Joe!
Now, when that happens, of course, Cobra's like, what's up? Now, let's look at this page. This is one of the weirdest looking Cobra Commanders I've ever seen drawn. Hands down, an odd looking Cobra Commander. He looks like one of those TV faces from the comic Saga. Again, this is a sign to me that there might have been a rush job here. That is a weird one. His head is too small for his body for sure, but just there's a sunken face look. Like it is, and it actually makes me think maybe he was originally drawn with the you know what? I wonder. Yeah, I'm gonna throw that out there. I wonder if he was originally drawn, at least on this page, conceptually. I wonder if he was drawn with his hood on, and maybe the face mask was done. A lot of times, if you need to do a correction, the inker can just do the correction because the inks are what gets picked up by the printers. So this Cobra Commander face is just so strangely drawn. I wonder if it was originally drawn with the hood, and then in production they realized, oh, this needs to be a face, like his mask, steel mask, because he's in battle. So maybe that's why it came out so strangely, because it really, really does. But either way, Cobra heads to take the field. This issue also has got some coloring, not problems, but it's got a nice laid back color scheme. I kind of like it. I kind of do. Like it's got like these really relaxing blues and greens and yellows throughout. It's not like overtly ominous, like an episode called Darkness you'd think would be. It's kind of this mellow, like relaxed teal thing going on throughout the entire book.
Yo, Joe!
Now, as Cobra's approaching in their 2 Hiss tanks and 2 Fangs, they are approached by the Dreadnoks, who are hightailing it out of Maguire. Cobra Commander realizes what happened, is that those idiots went onto the field and they ruined his surprise. So he's going to deal with them later. And the Dreadnoks, because they're mercenaries and awesome, they're just like, should we go back, give them a hand? No, we don't want to get swatted across the tarmac. No thanks, because they are just on motorcycles. They're not driving in tanks. They're not part of an assault force. They're just mercenaries who got a little overzealous. I will say this: the drawings on the Fang and the Hiss tanks are pretty toy accurate. They look pretty good. I like this representation of this stuff. It is really like your toys come to life here. It would have been neat if they did a Arbco Circus truck, and then kind of they could have used like done it like Optimus Prime scale. So you do a truck, right, and then the back, like the trailer just like opens up and it's got all the kinds of weapons and stuff on the inside, and maybe you could fit, like if you do it big enough, you could have fit like 1 Hiss tank in it or something like that. Or maybe the Cobra the Cobra vamp, was it the Scorpion? The Cobra Jeep, the black one that was the repaint and remold of the G.I. Joe vamp. That would have been awesome if they did like like an undercover truck that you could put some Cobra vehicles in. Oh, that would have been great.
Yo, Joe!
Finally, guys, page 17. We finally get name checked on Torch. As the Dreadnoks are making their way out, Buzzer says, "We only really get in trouble if he gets out at all. Really, rather clever of you, Torch." We finally get name checked on Torch. So welcome to the party, pal. So some rockets show up. They blow up the Arbco circus stuff, and that's G.I. Joe attacking. This final panel is cool. Not a lot of detail though. This is seems like it just came from real loose Springer layouts. Like the Ram motorcycle looks really weird, and we've seen the Ram drawn since literally issue 1, so we know what the Ram looks like. It doesn't necessarily look like that. Maybe there was, at this point, maybe they saw some prototypes for the Silver Mirage and got a little confused, but I have a feeling it's just kind of it was a loose sketch that got turned into some inks. But it's great to see an all-out assault by the Joes. And again, Joe's very much back up in their own issue this month.
Yo, Joe!
And The Dreadnoks waste no time. They know they're on motorcycles, so they just run away. Absolutely run away. Like, they're hightailing it on their motorcycle, and absolutely they all get away. And Hawk tells them to, to let them go. We got to go after the main force. They don't realize that they were fleeing the main force. But if you go by the direction, like kind of what was happening, you see Buzzer's in the lead, and Torch and Ripper were behind him. And in this middle panel, you see Buzzer, and then you see it's either Torch or Ripper, I'm not sure. And then to the left of them, you see two wheels that were part of an explosion, as if the Joes blew one of them up. Like, I wonder if that was originally how it was kind of translated in the drawing. And then you get to this, of course, you get to the third panel, and they all survived it. But this second panel absolutely makes it look like one of those guys got destroyed. And also, the proportions are really crazy on this too, guys. That APC is the biggest thing I've ever seen. It's a house compared to like the rest of the vehicles. But I guess, let me think, if the guys, if they're the scale they're drawing, that APC is really big. That's really big, or the Vamp is really small. There's a lot going on here, guys. I'm not so sure about this. There's a lot going on.
Yo, Joe!
Now, we've got the two Hiss tanks, and they're approaching the tower. It's funny, they're shooting at things, but there is literally no one shooting back at them. I don't know why they would miss the tower or anything that they're shooting at. But they haven't cut the tower down yet, because I don't know why. But the guys in the tower are pretty sharp, and they use the high beams, the spotlights, to blind the drivers of the tank. So while they're getting blinded, the Fangs are going to come in and knock the lights out. Again, no one is shooting back at them, so I'm not sure what the plan is on this. But what it does is it makes for a nice diversion, and I like that it empowers the guys that are working in the tower, who they themselves are military guys, because it's a military Air Force base. So it empowers them, and these guys aren't totally helpless. They're going to use what they have to kind of stop Cobra as much as they can.
Yo, Joe!
And it's like they were predicting the movie Die Hard. He's shooting at the lights, and the Fang blows the lights out, and right before it can kill all the guys that are in the tower, you see a dude's got his hands in the air like they're gonna get rockets launched at him. That Fang gets blown out of the sky by Clutch. And this is the panel I talked about just briefly earlier, where there's a line of dialogue that covers up a kind of a plot point that's overlooked in this issue. So I'm really glad that they caught this. Actually, I'm really glad. It feels like good editorial oversight. There were two tanks and there were two helicopters. In this caption, Hawk, who's driving the Vamp, says, almost as good as the shot Steeler made that disintegrated one of the Hiss tanks. And why is that an important piece of dialogue? Because there were two Hiss tanks, and only one of them gets accounted for in this issue. And the other one is not mentioned ever again. It's just completely overlooked. So that's cool. I like that they caught that. Whether, what point in the production did they catch it? I don't know. No idea. But I love that they did.
Yo, Joe!
Because they talked about, here comes that other Hiss. And we got the Mobat that's lining up on that Hiss. It's got the jump on Hawk. And in this panel, the Hiss that has the, quote, jump on Hawk is actually shooting not at Hawk, but it's shooting back at the tower with the other guys in it. So, I don't know. Like, I don't know what Cobra was trying to accomplish in this. They certainly did a piss poor job throughout the whole thing. But the Mobat blows that tank away, and that's Cobra Commander was on that tank. One of the remaining Fang helicopter swoops in. Cobra Commander jumps on board and escapes. They never account for that extra Hiss tank. So I don't know where it came from, if it escaped or what have you.
Yo, Joe!
And it's the rest of the ammunition from the Vamp or Hiss tank goes off, and we see that they're left. And now here, out of nowhere, first of all, there's those firefighters. Remember last issue when they were on the G.I. Jane, and these dudes in fire outfits just showed up out of nowhere to put things out? Same guys show up here, which is hilarious. And Ace is there for no reason. Ace was not a part of any of this episode, but he's there just to see one of his airplanes blow up. It's hilarious. He says, I just about had this one broken in, because Ace crashes a lot of airplanes. And he's just sad. He's even holding his helmet as if he's like, maybe there'll be a plane for me to jump in. It's great. It's great. There's a lot to love here. And we end with 2 panels of Destro and Firefly pulling into New York Harbor, bracketed by the Statue of Liberty. And they're going to head towards Springfield. And they want to make sure that Cobra Commander thinks nothing is wrong, so that his guard is down, when Destro and Firefly spring their revenge. Awesome. I mean, this is a whole lot of fun. This issue is a whole lot of fun. I love that it's a Cobra focused issue. I love the title. Darkness was very cool. That's great. I think there was some production issues. And just a quick look ahead, issue 31, we've got Rod Wingham doing the pencils. So definitely this seems like the end of the Frank Springer era. And looking ahead to 31, we see that Rod Wingham did the art next issue. And so it really makes me think that there were some deadline issues that were happening at the time with Springer. And so as it was getting later and later, they then eventually, next issue, they just bring in a guest penciler. And the story is continuing the story. So it's definitely not a guest storyline, like a one-shot that would just intercede in it. So the story totally continues next issue. But Springer takes an issue off. So that I really think there were just some issues going on at the time as far as production on the book. So it may not be the best rendered issue of this era, but it's a lot of fun. We're introduced to a lot of great stuff. We get the Dreadnoks being featured, Donuts and Grape Soda introduced. The Fred stuff was great. The Zartan in general, just the way they use them is fantastic. The battle, like the toyetic style of this fight was really fantastic. There's a lot to like, so I really dig it. So Darkness, G.I. Joe number 30. I want to thank everyone for listening. Remember to check out the Dreamer Comics podcast. And make sure you go to patreon.com/JoeOnJoePod and see how you too can help produce the Joe on Joe podcast. Thank you all so very much for listening. And now you Joe, and Joeing is half the battle.